The banker's fist slammed against the kitchen table so hard that Celestine's wedding china rattled in the cupboard. 3 days, Mrs. Ashworth. 3 days, or the sheriff comes with papers. Celestine's hands trembled as she clutched the foreclosure. Notice, rain hammering against the windows of the small farmhouse she'd called home for 8 years. The storm outside seemed fitting her world was collapsing just as violently. Since Marcus died in that grain silo accident 6 months ago, the bills had piled up like autumn leaves, suffocating her beneath their weight. Please," she whispered. But the banker was already heading for the door, his expensive coat dripping puddles on her worn wooden floors. The door slammed shut, leaving her alone with the howling wind and the crushing reality that she had nowhere to go. No family left, no friends wealthy enough to help, and at 28 she felt ancient and defeated. The small town of Millbrook had already forgotten Marcus, and she'd become invisible in her grief. Lightning illuminated the kitchen as she sank into the chair where Marcus used to read his farming journals. The foreclosure notice blurred through her tears. Tomorrow, she'd have to start packing the remnants of her life into whatever boxes she could find. A sharp knock interrupted her. Despair. Celestine wiped her eyes and opened the door to find a tall figure silhouetted against the storm. The man's face was partially hidden by shadows, but she caught a glimpse of a jagged scar running from his left temple to his jaw. "Ma'am, I'm Kieran." Blackthorn from the Double K Ranch, his voice was rough like gravel but not unkind, saw the bankman leaving. "Figured you might need help." Celestine had heard whispers about Kieran. Blackthorn, the mysterious rancher who'd bought the old Whitmore spread 5 years ago. Some said he was a war veteran. Others claimed he was running from something. All agreed he was dangerous, with that scar and his habit of keeping to himself. "I don't need charity," she said, pride flaring despite her desperation. "Not offering charity. I'm offering work." He stepped closer, and she could see his eyes were the color of storm clouds. "My housekeeper left last month. Place is falling apart. You'd have a roof over your head and wages." The rational part of her mind screamed warnings. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he might expect from her. But as thunder crashed overhead and rain began seeping through the kitchen window she'd been meaning to fix, rationality seemed less important than survival. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Something flickered in his scarred features' recognition. Of pain, perhaps. "Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go." Another flash of lightning revealed his truck waiting in her driveway, engine running. The choice was stark. Accept help from a stranger or face the streets with nothing. But the clothes on her back. "I'll need time to pack," she said quietly. "Pack what you need for tonight. I'll come back tomorrow for the rest." He turned to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Ashworth, you're not alone anymore." As his truck disappeared into the storm, Celestine closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She'd just agreed to live with a scarred stranger on an isolated ranch. Either she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, or somehow, salvation had knocked on her door in the middle of a storm. The Double K Ranch materialized from the morning mist like something from a dream. Celestine pressed her face to the passenger window of Kieran's truck, watching endless pastures roll by. Dotted with cattle and bordered by mountains that seemed to touch the sky, the main house was a sprawling structure of weathered wood and stone, with a wraparound porch that spoke of lazy summer evenings and simpler times. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Forgetting for a moment that she was essentially homeless, Kieran's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "It's isolated. Nearest neighbor is 15 miles. If you're having second thoughts, I'm not." The words came out more forcefully than she intended. She caught his surprised glance and softened her tone. "I mean, I'm grateful for the opportunity." Parked near the front steps, and Celestine could see why he needed help. The porch sagged in places, paint peeled from the shutters, and weeds choked the flower beds that had once been someone's pride. But the bones of the place were solid, beautiful even. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the right," Kieran said, grabbing her single suitcase from the truck bed. "Kitchen's through there, but don't feel obligated to cook. I mostly live on coffee and whatever's in cans." Following him through the front door, Celestine gasped. The interior was magnificent. Ceilings, a stone fireplace that could warm half her old house, and furniture that looked handmade and expensive. But everything was covered in dust, and newspapers were scattered across every surface. The previous owner's widow decorated it, Kieran explained, noticing her stare. I kept meaning to change things, but ... He shrugged, and she caught sight of his scar again. In daylight, it was even more dramatic. A white line that spoke of violence and pain. Her room was simple, but clean: a double bed with a quilt that looked homemade, a dresser, and a window that framed the mountains perfectly. It was more space than she'd had in years, and the view made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. The previous housekeeper left meal schedules and cleaning routines in the kitchen, Kieran said from the doorway. But don't feel tied to them. Do what makes sense to you. What happened to her? Celestine asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't her business. She got married, moved to town. His expression darkened, said the ranch was too lonely for a woman. There was something in his tone that made her look at him more carefully. The scar wasn't his only mark. There was a weariness in his eyes. That spoke of deeper wounds. She recognized it because she'd seen it in her own mirror every morning since Marcus died. I should let you settle in, he said, backing toward the stairs. If you need anything, I'll be in the barn most of the day. Alone in her new room, Celestine unpacked her few belongings and tried to process the upheaval of the last 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been facing homelessness. Today, she was living on a ranch with a mysterious man who'd rescued her for reasons she couldn't fathom. From her window, she could see Kieran in the distance, working with a horse in the corral. Even from here, she could see the fluid way he moved, the confidence in his handling of the animal. Whatever had scarred him, it hadn't broken his spirit entirely. The kitchen schedules were organized and detailed, clearly written by someone who cared about the ranch's smooth operation. As Celestine studied them, she realized she wasn't just taking a job, she was stepping into a life that had been abandoned, trying to restore something that had been lost. That evening she prepared a simple dinner of stew and bread, calling Kieran in from the barn as the sun set behind the mountains. He ate in silence, but she caught him glancing at her occasionally, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. This is good, he said finally. Haven't had a home-cooked meal in months. It's the least I can do, she replied. You saved my life yesterday. You saved mine too, he said quietly, then looked surprised by his own words. The place was falling apart. But Celestine suspected he meant something else entirely. 3 weeks into her new life, Celestine had established a rhythm that felt almost normal. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the neglected house, and dedicated afternoons to tending the small garden she'd discovered behind the kitchen. The work was hard, but satisfying, and for the first time since Marcus's death, she felt useful. Kieran remained polite but distant, speaking only when necessary and disappearing into ranch work from sunrise to sunset. She learned his habits. He took his coffee black, preferred his eggs over easy, and always hung his hat on the same peg by the door. He was methodical, careful, and she sensed he was fighting to maintain strict boundaries between them, but boundaries had a way of eroding. It started with small things. She'd catch him watching her hang laundry, his expression unreadable. He began lingering after meals, nursing his coffee while she cleaned dishes. When she found a litter of kittens in the barn, he helped her create a safe space for them, his scarred hands surprisingly gentle as he handled the tiny creatures. You're good with animals, she observed, watching him coax the shy mother cat with patient offerings of milk. Had a dog once, he said, his voice distant. Long time ago. Wanted to ask more, but something in his posture warned her away. Instead, she focused on the kittens, marveling at their trust in this intimidating man. The breakthrough came during a violent thunderstorm. Celestine was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, when the lights went out. She heard a crash from the front room and hurried to investigate, finding Kieran on the floor, breathing hard, surrounded by the shattered remains of a lamp. Kieran. She knelt beside him, noting the wild look in his eyes. What happened? Thunder, he managed, then seemed to realize how that sounded. I'm fine, just clumsy. But his hands were shaking, and she could see the rapid pulse in his throat. This wasn't clumsiness, this was terror. "It's okay," she said softly, the same tone she'd used with Marcus during his rare moments of vulnerability. "You're safe. You're home." Kieran's eyes focused on her face, and she saw the moment he truly looked at her for the first time. Not as his housekeeper or a charity case, but as a woman who understood pain. "I was in Afghanistan," he said quietly. "I took out my transport. I was the only survivor." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Celestine reached out slowly, covering his shaking hand with hers. "I used to have nightmares about the grain silo," she said. "About finding Marcus. Some nights I'd wake up screaming, and the neighbors would complain about the noise." His fingers tightened around hers. "Do they still come, the nightmares?" "Sometimes, but less often now," she hesitated, then added, "I think being here helps, having purpose again." They sat in the darkness, holding hands while rain lashed the windows. The storm outside mirrored the emotional tempest that had been building between them for weeks, and Celestine realized that somewhere in the routine of cooking his meals and sharing his space, she'd begun to heal. "I should clean this up," Kieran said finally, gesturing at the broken lamp. "We should clean it up," she corrected, and saw something shift in his expression as they worked together to clear the debris. Celestine felt the careful distance they'd maintained beginning to crumble. When their hands brushed, reaching for the same shard of glass, neither pulled away immediately. When he helped her to her feet, his touch lingered on her arm. "Celestine," he said, her name sounding different in his voice. Not like an employer addressing an employee, but like a man speaking to a woman he was beginning to care for. "Yes, thank you for staying. For not running when you saw me break down." "Where would I run to?" she asked. But they both knew that wasn't the real reason she'd stayed. The power flickered back on, illuminating them standing close together in the lamplight. For a moment, Celestine thought he might kiss her, and she realized she wanted him too. But instead, he stepped back, the careful distance reasserting itself. "I should let you get back to your baking," he said. But as he walked away, she caught him glancing back. And she knew something fundamental had changed between them. The first kiss happened by accident, or so they both pretended afterward. Celestine was on a ladder in the library, trying to dust the high shelves that had been neglected for months. The ladder wobbled, and she felt herself falling backward, already bracing for impact with the hardwood floor. Instead, she landed in Kieran's arms, his face inches from hers. For a heartbeat, neither moved. She could feel his breath on her lips, see the way his gray eyes darkened as they focused on her mouth. The scar that ran across his cheek was pale in the afternoon light, and she had the sudden urge to trace it with her fingertip. "I've got you," he said quietly, but he didn't set her down. "I know," she whispered back, and then somehow their lips were touching, soft and tentative at first. Then, with growing urgency, when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Kieran set her gently on her feet, his hands lingering on her waist. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "That was inappropriate." "You work for me, and I don't apologize," Celestine interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "Not for that." But the moment was broken, and Kieran stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair. "This complicates things. Does it have to?" He looked at her with such longing that her heart ached. "Not the same man I was before the war, Celestine. I have ... episodes. Nightmares. There are things about me you don't know." "There are things about me you don't know either," she said. "But that doesn't mean we can't figure them out together." Over the following days, they began to learn each other in ways that went beyond employer and employee. Kieran started joining her in the evenings, reading while she mended or worked on needlepoint. He taught her to ride his gentlest mare, his hands steady on her waist as he helped her mount. She showed him her small garden, sharing stories of her grandmother who had taught her about herbs and healing. "You're bringing this place back to life," he said one evening as they walked through the garden together. "It hasn't felt like a home since I bought it." "What did it feel like before?" she asked. He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Like a place to hide, he said finally. Somewhere I could be alone with my ghosts. And now? I'm starting to remember what it's like to live instead of just survive. The confession was accompanied by a kiss that was deeper than their first, more deliberate. This time, neither apologized. They began taking meals together regularly, and Celestine found herself looking forward to these moments more than she cared to admit. Kieran was intelligent and well-read, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once he began to trust her. He told her about his plans for the ranch, his dreams of breeding horses, the way the mountains look different in each season. I've been thinking, he said one evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, about expanding the horse operation, maybe offering trail rides to tourists. That sounds wonderful, she said, then hesitated. Do you think you'd want help with that? I mean, I could learn about horses, help with the guests, ... You'd want to stay? And if things between us? ... He gestured vaguely between them. I'd want to stay regardless, she said, then added more quietly, but I'm hoping things between us continue to develop. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. I'm not easy to love, Celestine. I have bad days. Days when I can't be touched. Or talked to. Days when I disappear into memories and can't find my way back. I have those days too, she said. Grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry. Is that what this is? Learning to carry it together? I think so. She squeezed his hand. If you're willing to try. His answer was another kiss. This one filled with promise and possibility. As the stars began to appear over the mountains, Celestine realized she was no longer just surviving in a strange place. She was beginning to build something new, something that belonged to both of them. The scarred rancher and the displaced widow were becoming something neither had expected. A family. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous-looking courier who wouldn't meet Kieran's eyes. Celestine was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard the front door slam with unusual force, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps pacing across the hardwood floor. She found Kieran in his study, standing with his back to her, the letter crumpled in his fist. His shoulders were rigid with tension, and she could see the telltale signs of one of his episodes beginning. Kieran, she approached carefully as she'd learned to do when he was struggling. What's wrong? He turned and she saw something she hadn't seen in weeks, the hollow, haunted look that had been in his eyes when they first met. They found me, he said simply. Who found you? He smoothed out the letter with shaking hands. He's coming here. Tomorrow. Celestine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Is that bad? I don't know. Kieran sat heavily in his desk chair, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. I left the army under complicated circumstances. After the incident that gave me this, he gestured to his scar. Ow. I wasn't exactly stable. She perched on the edge of the desk, close enough to touch him if needed. What kind of complicated circumstances? I was supposed to testify in a court-martial, his fellow soldier who'd been selling weapons to insurgents. But after the explosion, after months in the hospital, I couldn't. He trailed off, staring at the letter. I had a breakdown during the preliminary hearing, started screaming about bombs and dead friends. They recommended I take medical discharge instead of testifying. That doesn't sound like something you need to be ashamed of. The weapons that soldiers sold were used to make the IED that killed my unit, Kieran said quietly. 6 good men died because I couldn't hold it together long enough to put their killer in prison. Celestine felt her heart break for him. That's not your fault, isn't it? He looked up at her and she saw the guilt he'd been carrying. I ran, Celestine. I took the discharge, bought this place, and hid from everything, including my responsibility to the men who died. Before she could respond, the sound of a truck approaching echoed from outside. They both froze, listening to the engine grow louder. He's early, Kieran said, standing abruptly. Celestine, I need you to go upstairs. Whatever happens, whatever you hear, just stay up there until I come get you. Absolutely not. She stood too, blocking his path to the door. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. You don't understand. Colonel Morrison is. He's not a man you want to cross. If he thinks you're important to me, he might use that against both of us. Then we'll face him together, she said firmly. I'm not the fragile widow you've rescued anymore, Kieran. My woman who loves you, and I'm not going anywhere. The words hung between them, and she realized it was the first time either of them had said it out loud. Love. Despite everything, the circumstances of their meeting, the complications of their situation, the wounds they both carried somewhere, in the healing process, they'd fallen in love. Kieran cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. I love you too, he said. Which is why I need you to be safe. The truck door slammed outside, followed by heavy footsteps on the porch. Celestine had just enough time to see the fear in Kieran's eyes before the front door opened without invitation.
Ow.
A voice boomed from the front hall. Get your ass out here! Kieran's jaw tightened and she saw him transform before her eyes. The gentle man who'd taught her to ride, who'd kissed her under the stars, who'd shared his nightmares and dreams, disappeared. In his place stood a soldier, rigid and defensive. Stay behind me, he murmured, then louder. In here, Colonel. Morrison was exactly what Celestine had expected, all intimidating, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He filled the doorway of the study, his gaze sweeping over them both with obvious disapproval. So this is where you've been hiding, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Playing house with your girlfriend while good soldiers sit in prison. Sir, Kieran said, his voice carefully neutral. Don't sir me, son. You know why I'm here. Morrison's eyes fixed on Celestine. Ma'am, I need to speak with Mr. Blackthorne. Privately. Military business. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of her, Kieran said. God and Celestine heard the steel in his voice. Morrison's smile was cold. Very well, Sergeant Reeves is up for parole. The board wants to hear from his unit survivors before they make their decision. That means you, Blackthorne. You testify, or he walks free. The color drained from Kieran's face. I can't, I can't. Can't or won't. Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because I'm thinking you've gotten too comfortable in your little hideaway.
Aight.
Too comfortable to do your duty to the men who died.
Aight.
Kieran's hands began to shake, saw the familiar signs of panic building in his eyes. Without thinking, she stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. That's enough, she said quietly, but her voice carried its own authority. I think you should leave. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? You heard me? Get out of our home. The colonel's laugh was harsh. Your home, lady? You're living in a fantasy? This man is a broken soldier who ran from his responsibilities. He's not husband material. He's the bravest man I've ever known, Celestine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And he's twice the man you are. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison's face darkened, and for a moment, Celestine thought he might actually strike her. But Kieran's hand settled on her shoulder, and she could feel his strength flowing back. The lady asked you to leave, Kieran said, his voice steady now. I suggest you do it. Morrison looked between them, his expression calculating. You have 48 hours to decide, Blackthorne. Testify, or I'll make sure everyone in this county knows exactly what kind of coward they're harboring. He turned on his heel and strode out, leaving them alone with the echo of his threats and the weight of an impossible choice. After Morrison's truck disappeared down the winding ranch road, Kieran stood frozen in the study doorway, his face pale and drawn. Celestine reached for him, but he pulled away, shaking his head. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. You don't know what he's capable of. I know what I saw, she replied, following him as he walked toward the kitchen. I saw a bully trying to intimidate a good man into doing something that could destroy him. Kieran poured himself a cup of coffee with hands that trembled slightly. What if he's right? What if I am just a coward hiding from responsibility? Then why are you so afraid of testifying? Celestine asked gently. If you were a coward, you'd be afraid of facing Reeves. That's not what terrifies you, is it? He set down the cup without drinking, staring out the window at the mountains. I'm afraid of breaking down again, of proving that I'm not strong enough to see justice done. Or are you afraid of reliving the worst day of your life in front of a room full of strangers? When he didn't answer, she moved closer, careful not to touch him, but making sure he could feel her presence. Tell me about that day. About what really happened. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began. We were escorting a supply convoy to a forward base. I was in the lead vehicle with my best friend, Danny Martinez. We'd been joking about what we'd do when we got home. He wanted to open a restaurant, and I was going to help him get started. Kieran's voice cracked slightly. The IED was buried under a bridge. Military-grade explosives, the kind that shouldn't have been available to insurgents. Celestine felt tears prick her eyes but remained silent, knowing he needed to tell the story completely. The blast flipped our vehicle. It was thrown clear, but Danny, ... double quotes. He swallowed hard. Danny was trapped underneath. I could hear him screaming, could see the fire starting. I tried to get to him, but the other vehicles were exploding, and there was gunfire from the ridge. What did you do? I crawled toward him, got close enough to see his face, to hear him begging me to help him. But then another explosion threw me back, and something hit my face shrapnel, probably. When I came to, the medics were loading me into a helicopter, and Danny was ... double quotes he couldn't finish. You tried to save him, Celestine said softly. You did everything you could. Did I? Or did I let my friend die, because I was too hurt to keep trying? God. He turned to face her, and she saw the question that had been torturing him for years. Later, when I found out that Reeves had been selling weapons to the insurgents, that those weapons had been used to kill my unit, I wanted to testify. I wanted to see him burn for what he'd done. But sitting in that courtroom, seeing Reeves in his uniform, hearing the lawyers talk about Danny and the others like they were statistics, I started having flashbacks. Hearing Danny scream, smelling the smoke, feeling the heat from the fire, his voice broke completely. I stood up in the middle of the proceeding and started screaming at everyone to stop talking about him like he was dead, because he wasn't dead, he was just trapped and needed help. Celestine's heart shattered for him. Oh, Kieran, they had to sedate me. The judge declared a mistrial, and the prosecution decided not to retry the case with their key witness being mentally unstable. He laughed bitterly. So Reeves got transferred to another unit, and I got a medical discharge and a lifetime of wondering if I failed my friends twice. You didn't fail anyone, she said firmly. You're a survivor carrying survivor's guilt, and you need help processing trauma, not judgment. From men who weren't there. Morrison was there. He was our commanding officer. Morrison sent you all into an ambush with compromised equipment because he failed to investigate Reeves properly. Now he wants you to clean up his mess so he can retire. With a clear conscience? Kieran stared at her. You think this is about Morrison's reputation? I think this is about a lot of things, but your well-being isn't one of them. She stepped closer, finally reaching for his hands. The question is, what do you want to do? I want Reeves to pay for what he did. I want Danny and the others too. Get justice. But I also want to be able to sleep at night, to build a life with you without constantly looking over my shoulder. Then we figure out how to do both, she said simply. Did you think I was going to let you face this alone? She squeezed his hands. I meant what I said to Morrison. You're the bravest man I know, and I love you. We're going to get through this together. For the first time since Morrison's arrival, Kieran's expression softened. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything good in this world, she said, rising. On her toes to kiss him gently. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. That evening they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Kieran had been quiet for hours, and Celestine could practically see him working through his decision. I'm going to testify, he said finally. Not for Morrison, not for the army, but for Danny and the others. They deserve justice, even if I'm not the perfect witness. You're exactly the witness they need, Celestine said. Someone who loved them enough to still fight for them years. Later, will you come with me? To the hearing? Try and stop me. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as the first stars appeared overhead. I don't know what's going to happen. If I break down again, if Morrison finds ways to discredit me, if then we'll deal with it, she interrupted, together. No matter what happens, we'll face it together, as they sat in comfortable silence. Celestine realized that somewhere in the process of helping Kieran find his courage, she'd found hers too. The frightened widow who'd knocked on his door during a storm was gone, replaced by a woman ready to fight for the man she loved and the life they were building together. The military tribunal convened on a gray November morning in Denver. Courtroom filled with officers, lawyers, and a handful of family members seeking closure. Celestine sat in the front row directly behind the witness stand. Her presence a steady anchor for Kieran as he prepared to face his demons. Sergeant Reeves looked older than his 42 years, his face hard and unrepentant as he sat at the defendant's table. When his eyes met Kieran's, there was no remorse, only cold calculation. "The prosecution calls Sergeant Kieran Blackthorne," the prosecutor announced. Kieran rose slowly, his hand briefly touching Celestine's before he walked to the stand. His voice was steady as he took the oath, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his scarred hand gripped the chair arm. "Sergeant Blackthorne," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." "Sergeant Reeves was our supply coordinator," Kieran said, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "He was responsible for maintaining our equipment, including weapons, ammunition, and communication devices." "And did you notice anything unusual about the equipment in the weeks before the incident?" "Yes, sir. Several times we received weapons that were inferior quality, radios that malfunctioned, and vehicles that broke down more frequently than they should have." The prosecutor walked him through the technical details methodically. Celestine watched Kieran grow more confident with each answer. This was the part he could handle: the facts, the evidence, the military procedures. Then came the harder questions. "Sergeant Blackthorne, please describe the events of October 15th, 2019. Kieran's voice faltered slightly, and Celestine saw his hand tremble. She leaned forward, and when he glanced at her, she nodded encouragingly. "We were escorting a supply. Convoy 2 Forward Operating Base Mitchell," he began, then stopped, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "Take your time, Sergeant," the judge said kindly. Kieran looked at Celestine again, and she saw him drawing strength from her presence. "I was in the lead vehicle with Specialist Martinez and Private Chen. We were about 3 miles from the base. When we approached a bridge over a dry riverbed," his voice steadied as he continued, describing the explosion, the chaos, the desperate attempts to save his trapped friend. The courtroom was silent except for his words, and Celestine saw several officers wiping their eyes. "The weapons used in that ambush," the prosecutor said gently, "were they similar to weapons that had gone missing from your unit's inventory?" "Yes, sir." "The blast pattern was consistent with military-grade explosives?" "The same type that had been reported missing from our armory 6 weeks earlier." "Missing under whose watch?" "Sergeant Reeves was responsible for inventory control." The defense attorney tried to rattle Kieran during cross-examination, questioning his memory, his mental state, his ability to accurately recall events. But Kieran held firm, his answers consistent and clear. "Isn't it true, Sergeant, that you've been receiving psychiatric treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder?" "Yes, sir." "And isn't it true that you've had episodes where you've confused past events with present circumstances?" Kieran paused, and Celestine held her breath. "Yes, sir. I've had flashbacks and nightmares, but I've never confused the facts of what happened that day. I remember every detail because I relive it constantly." How can this court trust the testimony of someone who admittedly suffers from mental illness? Before the prosecutor could object, Kieran leaned forward. "Because I loved those men, sir. They were my brothers, my family. I may have PTSD, but I'm not crazy, and I'm not a liar. 6 good soldiers died because of that man's greed," pointed at Reeves. "I couldn't save them then, but I can speak for them now." The courtroom erupted in whispers, and Celestine felt tears streaming down her face. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, not just the gentle rancher who'd given her shelter, but the warrior who'd found his courage again. When the verdict came 3 hours later, Reeves was sentenced to 15 years in military prison. As the gavel fell, Kieran sagged with relief, and Celestine saw years of guilt and self-doubt finally beginning to lift from his shoulders. Outside the courthouse, Colonel Morrison approached them, his expression grudging but respectful. "Good testimony, Blackthorne. Those men finally got their justice. No thanks to you, Celestine said sharply, stepping protectively closer to Kieran. Morrison's jaw tightened. I was doing my job. Your job was to protect the soldiers under your command, Kieran said quietly. You failed them once by not investigating Reeves properly. I won't let you fail them again by taking credit for their justice. The colonel's face darkened, but he said nothing more, walking away with his shoulders rigid with wounded pride. Feel better? Celestine asked, as they watched him go. Actually, yes, Kieran said, surprised. I think I do. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing the emotional weight of the day. As they crested the hill that revealed the double K spread below them, Kieran pulled over and turned to face her. I have something to ask you, he said, his voice nervous. I've been thinking about it for weeks, but I wanted to wait until this was over. Celestine's heart began to race. What is it? I know we haven't been together very long, and I know I'm not the easiest man to love, but ... He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I can't imagine my life without you in it. You saved me, Celestine. You made me want to be whole again. She stared at the box, her hands trembling. Kieran ... I don't have much to offer except a half-fixed ranch and a man who's still learning how to live with his scars. But I love you more than I thought possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you trusted me with your heart. He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful solitaire diamond. The stone catching the afternoon light like captured starfire. Will you marry me? Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, with shaking hands, then pulled her across the truck's bench seat to kiss her deeply. When they broke apart, both were crying. I love you, she said against his lips. I love your strength, your gentleness, your courage. I love the way you fought to heal, the way you've helped me heal too. We're going to be okay, he said, and for the first time she heard absolute certainty in his voice. Whatever comes next, we're going to face it together. 6 months later, they were married in the garden behind the ranch house, surrounded by wildflowers and the friends they'd made in the community. Kieran's former unit members, who'd testified at the trial, served as groomsmen, and the local minister, who'd married them, spoke about second chances and the healing power of love. The ranch flourished under their joint care. Kieran expanded the horse operation as planned. Celestine proved to have a natural talent for hospitality, turning their guest ranch into one of the most sought-after destinations in the region. The old house glowed with warmth and laughter, filled with the sounds of visitors, the laughter of children from Kieran's veteran support group, and the quiet contentment of two people who'd found their way home. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Celestine reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Do you ever think about that night? She asked. When you knocked on my door during the storm? Every day, Kieran said, his arm tightening around her. I think about how close I came to driving past, how I almost talked myself out of stopping. What made you do it? He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her arm. I saw myself in you. The loneliness, the fear, the feeling of being completely lost. I couldn't save Danny or the others, but maybe I could save you. You did save me, she said softly. But you know what? I think I saved you too. How's that? You were hiding from life, from connection, from the possibility of being hurt again. But you chose to open your door to a stranger, to risk caring about someone new. That took incredible courage. Kieran pressed a kiss to the top of her head. We saved each other. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Celestine thought about the path that had led them here. A widow with nowhere to go and a scarred rancher afraid to live two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other's arms. The ranch that had once been a place to hide had become a sanctuary for healing, not just for them but for everyone who found their way to the Double K veterans struggling with PTSD. Women escaping difficult situations, families looking for peace and connection, all were welcome at the table Kieran and Celestine had built together. I have news, Celestine said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Good news, and straightened, his eyes searching her face. Are you? 3 months along, she confirmed, smiling at his expression of wonder and joy. Dr. Martinez confirmed it this morning. A baby, he breathed, his scarred hand covering hers. We're going to have a baby? Are you happy? Happy? Laughed, the sound rich with emotion. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. I never thought I'd have this, a family, a future, a reason to believe in tomorrow. Well, you do now, she said, leaning into his embrace. All of it. As they sat together under the star-filled sky, planning for the future and marveling at the unexpected turns their lives had taken, Celestine knew with absolute certainty that they'd found there forever. The storm that had brought them together had passed, leaving behind clear skies and endless possibilities. The Double K Ranch stretched out before them. A testament to the healing power of love, the strength found in vulnerability, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the most broken people are exactly what each other needs to become whole again. Their story had begun with a desperate knock on a door during a thunderstorm, but it would continue through seasons of joy and sorrow, challenge and triumph. Always grounded in the unshakable foundation they'd built together, a love strong enough to weather any storm, deep enough to heal any wound, and bright enough to light the way home for anyone still lost in the darkness and in the years to come. When visitors asked about the ranch's name, Kieran and Celestine would smile and explain that the Double K didn't just stand for Kieran's last name, stood for the two things that had made their life possible: kindness and courage. The kindness to open their hearts to love again, and the courage to trust that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. The widow with no place to go had found her home, and the scarred rancher had discovered that. His greatest strength wasn't in his ability to survive alone, but in his capacity to love and be loved in return. Together, they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives, a legacy of hope that would endure long after the mountains themselves had worn away.